In this video, I will present you how to create and save a new macro. A macro is a group of multiple elements working together. This group can have a macro dialog, which is used to initialize some variables. We'll now start the process of creating a new macro. When creating one, the best thing to do is make it in a separate new project. It will permit you to know which file to save, and it is way easier to debug. First of all, create a new folder with the name of the macro. Inside of it, create two more. Name the first one macro DLG and the second one macro PRJ. Now that this is done, open the editor and create your macro project. Change the name to macro PRJ and put the path of the folder we create right before in the path box. Now, get into the project one view and add all the elements you want to have inside of your macro and configure them. We already did that and made a button triggering a variable displaying a pop-up on mouse down. As you can see in the simulation, this is working just fine. Now that this is done, select all elements and group them thanks to the group functionality. If you have any variable that you would want to initialize inside of the macro dialog, select the grouped element and go to Crossref. Once in Crossref, find the variable you want to edit in the macro dialog and add an index. Be sure to put an index you're not using anywhere else. We are now going to create the macro dialog project. First of all, choose between a large or a small dialog depending on your needs. Don't touch anything in the name field. We will explain to you the reason of that later on. Once again, put the path of the folder we created earlier on. When going into the view, multiple elements are already displayed. Remove what you don't need and keep what you need. In this case, we don't need much. The principle is always the same. Write the index you gave in the macro project, then what you would like to change from the variable. It can be the type, value, or name. In our case, it will be the name of the string, because strings aren't variable, they only have a name and a type. Now that you've configured all the needed indexes, save your work and make a build all. The build all is really important. You will miss some files when saving the macro otherwise. When it is done, reopen your macro project and put your grouped element to the top left corner. After that, do a build all as well. It is now time to save the macro. Per default, it will always save the macro in the macro lib from the editor, which isn't a bad thing, but be sure to save them elsewhere as a backup as well. Now choose the name of the macro and preferably put the version of the editor you're working on. It will be easier to keep track of the version of your macro as the editor gets updated. You will now have to add all the other files, starting by adding all images you need in your macro. Then go to the macro dialog folder and look for the start build auto deploy folder. Once inside of it, select all the files starting with md_. That is the reason why you don't want to change the name of the macro dialog project, because otherwise you won't find those files. Finally, click on New Save, and now you've created your macro. Now it is time to test your macro to see if it actually works. We are now simply going to create a new project, insert the macro, and see if it works. Now, click on the macro icon. Click on File Open dialog, and you should see your macro right there. If you save them somewhere else, just go to that folder and do the exact same thing. You should now see your macro dialog popping up and be able to initialize your variable. Now, press the OK button and verify if the variable has been initialized. If the variable has been initialized, the macro is good to go. Otherwise, repeat the beforehanded steps and verify if you've done everything correctly. I will now show you the purpose of the incur suffix. I have from the previous scene macro two examples, one with incur and one without it. As we can see, when we insert two macros with an incur suffix, the two pop-ups will be triggered separately when pressing on the button. In the second example without incur, we can see that both pop-ups are displayed when pressing on the buttons. The incur suffix is made to differentiate the variable proper to the macro from the variable global to the project. What the incur suffix will do is add the timestamp in the end of the variable to make it unique. Please only use that on containers. You should now have all the information needed to create your own macros. Have a good day and see you for another tutorial.